good evening, everybody. This is Jacqueline Luqman.
And I'm Abdul Shahid Luqman.
And this is Live in Luqman Nation on Sunday evening. It is October 29th. And we are in Washington, D.C., the cool and rainy, autumny Washington, D.C. Welcome to the most threatening show on the internet, where here in Luqman Nation, the only currency we have in Luqman Nation is truth.
I kind of like this rain, you know.
I do too.
Yeah,
I do. Yeah.
Yeah, I kind of like the rain. Hey, everybody out there. Look, we're going to give you guys a chance to build up your audience. Go out, get your coffee and your cakes, and make that last bathroom run if you got to. But we have some really interesting topics that we're going to cover today, don't we, Jackie?
I think we do. This is some stuff that we've been wanting to talk about for a little while, but you know, current events happening the way they do. Mm-hmm. It's hard to keep on top of stuff since we're not in a position to do a show every day like some people, because we have jobs. So and we have life and stuff that we have to do. So we know that we have to be on a little bit more frequently. So we decided twice a week, Wednesday and Friday, and the odd live stream in between when something really pressing happens. And then we contribute to other platforms too. We contribute to We Are the Media. Sometimes we will be contributing articles to, I'm so excited about this, Progressive Army. Thank you all so much. So you'll be seeing some Luqman Nation stuff there on Progressive Army's outlet. We are going to be contributing some stuff to MediaRevolt.org. We need you to go over to MediaRevolt.org. That is a platform that has been set up by our good friend and sister Anoa Shanga and Michael Salambe, I think I'm pronouncing his name right, which is another alternative to a news aggregate social media content site that it's an alternative to Facebook. Facebook being the biggest guy on the block, but MediaRevolt.org is another outlet for us to disseminate information about issues that are important to us that we know we're not going to get in mainstream media.
Yeah, because I don't know how long this Facebook thing is going to continue. I'm serious. If you've been paying attention, Mark Zuckerberg, founder of Facebook, he had got called down to Congress, and there's some shady stuff going on there with the Trump administration demanding that he release some information on people who joined this anti-Trump group, and we've even seen it on our level where we're being censored. We've tried to share some things and boost certain posts, and only for the Facebook committee to come back and say, oh well, that's outside of our guidelines because it mentions this and it mentions that, and so I'm not sure. I think we're at an age now where Facebook, at least for those of us who are about social justice and activism and trying to organize, I think that our days are numbered with this platform.
I think you're right. I think we're going to have to depend a lot less on Facebook solely as an information disseminator, even when it comes to live streams. That's why we're on so many platforms. We're on Periscope and Twitter. Periscope, is the live platform that feeds Twitter. Luqman Nation 1. We're on YouTube, Luqman Nation. We're about to connect to either Spreaker or Blog Talk Radio for podcasting of this broadcast so people can hear it. We can't rely on just one outlet anymore, because as we have seen, we just can't trust people to spread the message, like I said, of issues that are important to us, honestly and completely, fairly, and without bias. And I mean, we can't even trust them to portray us whoever us is, whether it's black people, whether it's progressives, whether it's leftists, whether it's anybody outside of the, especially the Democratic Party mainstream, we can't trust these people to portray us fairly, as we saw just recently with the Atlanta Journal-Constitution hit piece on Marcus Farrell last week.
Right.
And I do want to mention real quick before we talk about the first story that we've been watching with a lot of interest for the past few months actually, that Marcus Farrell was on Joy Reid's show, AM Joy, the other day, and we're going to try to find that, try to get that clip for you and to provide it. And he also did a follow-up stream on Twitter where he talked about some issues that he didn't get a chance to talk about on AM Joy. So we're going to try to find those for you so you can hear from Marcus Farrell himself about that whole yellow journalistic hit piece that came out about him and Stacey Abrams' campaign in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. So, being children of, I don't know what you want to call us. We're like, I don't know, children of the 80s, 90s.
Well, we're our official name is we're Generation X.
Oh, are we Generation X?
We are Xers, yes.
I never could tell which generation I belong to, partially because I don't pay any attention to that stuff. So I'm still surprised that I'm 50. I'm still really kind of freaked out that I am 50 years old, and I'm technically middle-aged now.
I mean, if you was wine, 50-year-old wine is that'd be quite expensive.
Oh, that's a good point.
That's it, yeah.
Thank you. I'm an expensive bottle of wine. That's what. So, okay, the whole point in bringing up which generation we belong to and my age is I'm watching with a great deal of interest, and so are you, because we've talked about this, the growing opioid crisis and the growing risk. Now, not necessarily the crisis itself, which is bad enough, but we're watching with interest the response to the opioid crisis.
Yes,
that we've seen in the media, and especially from politicians. If you've been following the news, the president, who I do not like to name, I really don't like saying that man's name. I really don't. But the president our current president, made a sweeping new promises Thursday to mobilize the federal government against the deadly opioid epidemic. But pretty typical of what we thought he was going to do, because he had said, we're going to do something about the opioid crisis and we're going to declare it a national emergency. Well, he didn't do that. He declared it a national health emergency, right?
But there's a reason why he didn't want to declare it a national emergency.
Right. So what is the reason he didn't want to declare it a national emergency?
Because if you declare it a national emergency, then you got to put some money behind it.
Right.
That's why. I mean, you could declare and say, oh yeah, this is a crisis. This is however he phrased it, what you just said that he phrased. But when you say something is a national emergency, then that requires the government to spend some resources on it, and that's where they stop short of. Trump, made all these sweeping promises, and they in the media made this big hoopla of his press conference when he declared the opioid epidemic as a crisis, as a public health emergency. It's the wording, public health emergency. That doesn't require the government to do anything. And so the media, and as you go into the story, which I'm sure you will see that he did do some things. But I mean, trust me, it's just just putting a Band-Aid on a gunshot wound.
Yeah, it is. Now, according to the Los Angeles Times, Trump directed the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services to declare, get this, a limited 90-day public health emergency in regard to the opioid crisis, but he declined to declare a broader national emergency or ask Congress to fund any expansion in treatment or insurance coverage for Americans struggling with addiction. Now, I hope our sound is okay, guys, because we all, look.
I'm not getting no complaints.
Okay, we're not getting any complaints on the sound. Good, I'm glad. So we're just going to keep going through this. Now, I believe I remember this person saying that he was going to address the opioid crisis during his campaign.
He said it a couple of times.
Yeah, he said it a couple of times. And all of these struggling, poor white people who are really honestly being hit hard with this crisis, that we're not making light of this at all, voted for him partially because they were expecting the government to help them under this man's administration. And what did he do? What did he do? Nothing.
Right.
He said some words. That literally is all he did. He said some words, and he told the Department of Health and Human Services to say some words and to maybe put out a press release and put some words on some paper. But there is no funding. There's no help. There's no assistance. There's no treatment. There's no policy. There's no nothing behind any of those words. And that is critically important, not just to the current opioid crisis, and I want people to understand, please understand that we are not making light of the opioid crisis.
No, we're not. I mean, this is not the point of keeping score.
No. This is not a scorekeeping, or as some people, I've heard some people describe it. Oh, the oppression Olympics.
Right,
I had it.
Right.
Who had it worse? No. We have to examine the history between of the difference between the responses to these two very similar drug epidemics in this country, because what's happening now to one group of people is partially happening because most people in this country really didn't care about what was done in response to another group of people this similar thing happened to years ago. So, I mean, the opioid epidemic is a monstrous, ravaging tragedy. Last year alone, just in last year, 64,000 Americans died as a result of the opioid crisis. The current opioid epidemic, it is the deadliest drug crisis in American history. And I want to show you this graphic before I get into talking about the difference between these two issues, because it's important to give you a picture of how this thing has grown,
how deadly
it's become. So this is a graphic of the opioid related deaths since 1999.
So we're talking about 20 years.
20 years.
Right.
20 years. So you see up here the map of the United States in the upper left hand corner. Very few opioid related deaths. But as the years go on, and the 2014 was the last year that this data was collected.
I mean, but that's only 3 years ago.
But that's only 3 years ago.
You know,
the areas in orange and red are the areas in the country in which opioid-related deaths are reported. Where they occur. This is how bad this crisis has become over 20 years. And it's 20 years of the government knowing that it's been going on. 20 years of the government not only knowing it's been going on, but 20 years of the government giving pharmaceutical companies tax breaks and allowing pharmaceutical companies and insurance executives to write healthcare legislation while they raked in money as they were creating more and more opium-based painkillers,
right?
Pushing those painkillers on people and basically addicting a nation. And politicians do nothing. They have done nothing in 20 years to curb it, to stop it, to address the growing addiction problem. So now we are at 64,000 deaths due to opioid overdoses last year alone. But it is critical to understand how we got here, not just in relation to the pharmaceutical companies and their culpability in the opioid crisis, because they are culpable. They are absolutely responsible. It's very important to look at a lesson from the past.
And I just want to add in there, when we talk about the pharmaceutical companies, there's only 2 countries on the planet that allows pharmaceutical companies to directly advertise to their population. That's the United States and New Zealand. Every other country in the world does not allow pharmaceuticals to advertise to their citizens.
So there is no other country in the world where drug companies can pay for advertising for their drugs.
Except the United States and New Zealand. That's it.
Yeah. We're going to have to do a whole nother show about, but do you see how culpable not only the pharmaceutical companies are, but our government and our media companies are? They're all culpable in this, but they were all culpable in this 30 years ago.
You know, George Bernard made a good point. He said that the opioids are from Afghanistan, from a connected pharma company, and he read that somewhere, George. And if you could provide that link for us, we would really love to share that.
Yes.
The United States is the #1 drug consumer in the world. The #1 drug consumer in the world, whether it's opioids, cocaine. We are this country is the #1 drug consumer in the world. So, and we spoke about this before, Jackie, that, and as you go on, is that one of the things that we're going to, because this is the Luqman point of view on things. One of the things that we're going to talk about is what we believe how the country should be fighting this. Afghanistan, and they blamed it on the Taliban.
Right.
And I don't want to get off subject, but just saying that when the Taliban was in control, the poppy seeds, the poppy fields were destroyed. The opium fields were destroyed.
That's right. I remember.
Yeah, I mean, so much. I mean, there was no opium really coming out of Afghanistan after when the Taliban had it. Now, all of a sudden, it's they're blaming this influx of in our country of opium on the Taliban now. And it's hard for me to believe that, considering that the United States has such a huge military presence there. There's no way that I could see Taliban Afghanis just openly growing opium and without some kind of wink, nod
right
from officials allowing that to happen if that's what's happening.
Exactly, and especially since we do know that the American military is actually there guarding poppy fields.
I mean, but in Vietnam.
It was the same thing.
Yeah, I mean, let's face it. In Vietnam, a lot of the heroin that hit the streets of America was facilitated by American military, and we know that from American Gangster,
right?
Other thing with American military was directly involved in shipping heroin over here into the United States. So it's nothing new,
right?
It's nothing new at all.
No. So, I mean, in understanding that this is not a new phenomenon, we do have to learn from the past, and it's not even a past epidemic, because our communities are still suffering from the crack epidemic that began in the late 1980s, when we went through, like I said, an eerily similar. I'm telling you, looking at the opioid epidemic unfold is a lot like looking at the crack epidemic unfold where I live, and I know it's a lot like looking at it from where Camden, Washington D.C., Philadelphia, New York City, Atlanta, and everywhere. And so it was a very similar period of drug addiction in this country, of an epidemic of drug addiction, but it just happened to a different group of people, and in what was and still is referred as, I just said it, the crack epidemic. We witnessed an unprecedented rise in drug addiction, violence, and desperation. I have told a story about how I saw my neighborhood change, like literally over the summer.
Yeah, we all did.
Yeah, and it was an amazing, in a horrifying kind of way, way to see a neighborhood that was poor, but that was a great place to grow up and be a kid, turn into a really frightening place to live. And that was the experience that a lot of black people, especially poor black people, had during the crack years or the crack epidemic. So as crack addiction ravaged many cities and neighborhoods, the overwhelming response from Americans was not the compassion we see today, because everybody wants to help the opioid addicts, and we should. We absolutely should. But that wasn't the response that crack addicts got in the late 80s and not even today. What they got was fear. As a matter of fact, the opening paragraph of Craig Reinerman and Harry G. Levine's book, Crack in America, you can get that on Amazon or in a bookstore. I'm trying to steer people away from Amazon because of Jeff Bezos and his horrible labor practices. Apologies, y'all. Don't buy it from Amazon. Craig Reinerman's and Harry Levine's book, Crack in America, paints the picture of life during that period. This is a quote directly from the book. In the spring of 1986, American politicians and news media began an extraordinary anti-drug frenzy that ran until 1992. From 1980 to 1992, 1986 to 1982, newspapers, magazines, and television networks regularly carried lurid stories about a new epidemic or plague of drug use, especially crack cocaine. They said this epidemic was spreading rapidly from cities to the suburbs and was destroying American society. It is certainly true that the United States has real health and social problems that result from illegal and legal drug use, but it is certainly also true that the period from 1986 through 1992 was characterized by anti-drug extremism. Now, two things are very important about that description of that period of time then. First, crack cocaine was perceived as a threat to American society. Second, the period was characterized by anti-drug extremism. Americans were consumed not with compassion, again, but with disgust of the addicts and fear of the drug, rather than concern for the people who had become ensnared by it. So people were terrified by the drug's potential destruction, and Americans were bent on stomping it out. Unfortunately, what that turned into was not drug treatment.
Not at all.
It wasn't after-school programs. It wasn't diversion programs. No. It wasn't jobs programs. Unfortunately, what it turned into was stomping out the people
That's exactly
who were gripped by addiction, or by those people who made their little piece of change selling drugs, slinging crack as we called it, because your average street slinger was not making big bank on the corner selling crack. They were getting by. Everybody was not becoming a kingpin slinging crack.
That's right.
You know, so what happened was, instead of getting rid of the drug, we tried to get rid of the people. And that's where the 94 crime bill and militarized policing and mass incarceration came into play.
I mean, during that time, you couldn't even get elected to public office unless you told people how tough you was going to be on them black drug dealers.
Right.
During the 80s and the 90s. You couldn't even get elected because the first thing your opponent would say was that you were soft on crime. Mm-hmm. And that was the dog whistles on, well, what are you going to do about them black boys on the corners? You know, what are you going to do about that? And so then we had this, as you were saying, Jackie, with the rise of mass incarceration, militarized police, over-policing of our communities. But then there's two things that really took place that I see that is similar today. Is that during the 1980s, what we witnessed coming up was further disinvestment in the inner cities. Those of us who grew up working in government-funded job programs during the summer. I was working in a job summer program. Jackie was working in one. Ronald Reagan took that away, you know, and a lot of kids, you know, my age, during that time, every year we look forward to working for that summer program because it provided money for us to go on dates and get our school clothes and all that other kind of stuff that kids do. You know, in my case, it helped me support my family because I come from a divorced family. My mother was a waitress, wasn't making a lot of money. And so a lot of what I've earned during the summer went to the household to help feed people. That was taken away. And I wasn't unique in that. There were a lot of other friends of mine who were in the same situation. I didn't make the choice to become a drug dealer, but some of my friends did because it was just so prevalent. I mean, you know, you would see people, kids our age, walking around with a lot of money in their pockets. And I mean, and this is no exaggeration. It was so prevalent in our communities that there were grandmothers selling crack. Yeah, I literally seen grandmothers on the porch with brown bags selling crack. But it's not that the people were bad. It's the fact that the economic that the economic situation in our community has gotten worse. You know, you heard Jackie and I speak plenty of times on this program about how our parents were able to work in manufacturing. My father worked in manufacturing. When one of the companies that he worked for had a fire, he was able to get a job the next day at another factory. You know, so I mean, and then that just all disappeared. So then you took, you know, so you have that, you have the disinvestment in the urban areas. Then you had the job summer programs leaving, and then comes this crack. Then comes this crack, and now you're already talking about an economically depressed community. Like I said, you don't live free in America. You know, you don't live free in America. You know what I mean? So what are you going to do? Rent got to get paid. You know, bills got to get paid. People got to eat. And but again, that's what was left for us. Now, you also see that today, and I think Jackie, you got it in there too. But today it's the same thing. Huntington, West Virginia, which was the subject of this documentary called Heroin. It's on Netflix. Check it out. Huntington, West Virginia has the highest overdoses in the United States, and they also. No jobs, hopelessness. The same thing that I grew up with and seeing in my community, now they're seeing it in their community too. And then now you got these drugs coming through, and it's causing the same type of effects that it did in my neighborhood 20 years ago. The problem of it is that we still haven't recovered from the so-called crack epidemic. We lost a few generations, and guess what? In Huntington and other rural areas, they lost a couple of generations too, because this crisis of the drug crisis, that's how long that's the kind of damage that it does. The same thing that was happening to poor black women, having their kids taken away from them and in foster care, black men being locked up, all of these things that happen in the black community is happening in these places like Huntington now, except the faces are white. So it's nice for Trump to get up there and talk about, you know, declaring this a public health emergency. But then there's another thing for government to really take this seriously and put some real meat behind those words. Yeah, it is. And so we're looking at a situation where we've had the same kind of crisis happen, almost the exact same kind. You know, a drug addiction crisis and the fallout from it, and there is no infrastructure, there's no social infrastructure that exists to handle this crisis. None. The mental health, the federally funded mental health services and budget was cut decades ago, beginning in the Carter administration. People keep blaming that on Reagan. That started in the Carter administration. Reagan just made it worse
But it started in the Carter administration with the defunding of federal funded mental health facilities and services. Why is that important in the issue of a drug addiction crisis? Because those facilities often provided addiction services.
They did detox.
They provided detoxes. They provided methadone clinics. They provided inpatient addiction services. So when the crack epidemic hit our neighborhoods, in our neighborhood we have St. Elizabeth's Hospital, which is the largest and I think the oldest, or one of the oldest federally funded mental institutions in the country. It's where John Hinckley Jr. was committed after he tried to assassinate Ronald Reagan. We always knew that was a mental institution, and there was never any stigma with it. But they had funding to take care of the patients, to give them their medication, to house and feed and provide services for them so that people could get well from whatever issue. I'm not saying it was the best place, but it was something that poor people had. And some of those people were struggling with some kind of addiction. They could go to St. E's, that's what we called it, St. E's. They could go to St. E's, they could commit themselves, they could get into detox, and they could get help. When the federal government, when the federal budget for mental health institutions was cut, those services were eliminated. And all of a sudden, we had a homeless population that was also addicted to crack in our neighborhoods. All of a sudden, almost overnight.
Yeah, so you got crack and you got psychotropic drugs that they were already on. You had the increase in the homeless population, which happened where I lived also. And the only thing that they were met with was more policing.
Right.
You know, they did all of those things because they felt like, you know, they were saving money. They were shutting down mental institutions in Philly. They shut down mental institutions in New Jersey. All these places, and it increased the homeless population. But the opioid epidemic now is costing the American government $78 billion a year.
Wow.
$78 billion a year so far is costing, this opioid crisis alone is costing $78 billion a year. You know, I mean, human suffering costs.
Yeah.
It does. I mean, when you decide not to invest in your people and your citizens, then you're going to pay it either on the front or you're going to pay it on the back. That's the reason why we so much advocate for universal health care and all these things, because in actuality, when you invest in people, you save money in the long run.
Right.
But somehow our politicians haven't understood that. But it's not that they haven't understood it. It's that they answer to other authorities besides the people they're supposed to represent.
Right, right. And just to wrap this topic up, because we want to give the last 25, 30 minutes to our other topic, but it is closely related to what we're talking about right now. During the crack epidemic, there were lots of politicians and community leaders who were, yes, very afraid of the violence in our neighborhoods. And I went to plenty of those community meetings with my little neighborhood watch group. And we tried to work with the police department, sat in meetings with the police sergeants and the lieutenants and police officers, and had police officers walking with us on our neighborhood watch, in our neighborhood watch group, and tried to form a very strong relationship with them, and we did. So we had a lot of politicians and community leaders who, yes, wanted to address the violent crime. Well, they wanted something to be done about the violent crime. But many of them also wanted drug treatment. The funding to be returned for drug treatment. The funding to be returned or restored for summer youth employment. Funding to be restored for diversion programs and community programs for, after school. Quality education. A lot of black leaders did ask for these things. But what they got instead was the 94 crime bill. And the 94 crime bill didn't include any of those things. The 94 crime bill included more money for more police. Now there was definitely a mood in our communities. I will admit this is very true, where some of us had an attitude of distancing ourselves from, those
it was stigmatized.
It was stigmatized. We some of us did stigmatize our own people in a rush to protect our communities. And unfortunately, a lot of those people, way too many of them were clergy. Way too many of them were clergy. And some of them still have that attitude today. So instead of one of the most powerful and influential institutions in the black community rallying to the aid of the most vulnerable people in our communities, because by the 90s, we knew it was the CIA and the government that was involved in trafficking crack in our neighborhoods. We'd figured that out. And even though people didn't believe us for a while, now everybody knows that's true. Just like everybody knows that the government is involved in the opioid crisis. The same thing was true with the crack epidemic. But it seems like our religious institutions have not recovered from that attitude of stigmatizing the most vulnerable in our communities, because we're still in this struggle. This larger struggle against white supremacy and for black liberation and for black political power and for black economic equality. And we've got activists, we've got politics, we've got the entrepreneur class, but what we don't have is the backing of the black church. What's up with that? So we do believe that there needs to be a seismic shift. As people of faith, we believe this, that there needs to be a seismic shift in the way the black church is involved in this struggle at this point. We believe that the black church has to re-engage itself in the struggle for revolution for black people in the 21st century. And we can say that. We can say that it's possible. Let me say that. It's possible to do that because we belong to a church that does that. So let me give you an example of what we mean when what it looks like or sounds like when a black church applies the scripture in the way that they are meant, that they were actually lived in a revolutionary way for the betterment of all people. Let me see if I can get this window capture right for you guys. Let me find it. There it is. And I hope you can hear it.
Or female. Right? It is such an abstract concept. But the reality is what the text is saying is that if you love God, then the expression of that love is your love of neighbor. The test. I can say I love God all I want to say that I love God, but the test about the love of God is found in that agape love in my relationship to the stranger. It's easy to love the folks in your sorority. It's easy to love the folks in your fraternity. Folks you went to your HBCU with. Right? Folks, it's easy to, but what about the folk that are different? What about the folk that don't speak your language? What about the folk who are not from where you are? What about the folk who don't look like you? What about all of those folks that you may not ever understand? We're being challenged. God is saying, love God with all your heart, all your soul, all your mind, all your strength, and your neighbor as yourself, and the stranger as yourself, and the foreigner as yourself. And sisters and brothers, it takes us into a radical place of love, the radicality of Jesus. Jesus is challenging the Sadducees and the Pharisees with the radicality of this dynamic of love. To love my sister and brother as a sister and brother. To love God as God is my parent, and to relate to God in that equation of respect, to understand that I am blessed by God and called to engage in this kind of radical love. Now, Jesus came to teach it to you. Jesus came to teach it to you, but most of y'all weren't paying attention. He came to teach you. He came to teach you to love the undocumented immigrant. He came to teach you to love the foreigner. Came to teach you to reach beyond those places where we like to be comfortable and you know, somebody gonna say, well, where did he say love the undocumented immigrant? When the leper came and he healed them. You can't get any more undocumented than a leper. Touched them and healed them. And then we're told only one came back to thank him. And that one wasn't even somebody who was a traditional Jew, but was somebody within the culture that was called everything but a child of God. That was a Samaritan. And then he stops by the well of the Samaritan woman. And he reveals his divinity to her. And then he visits the guy who had been born blind. And then he takes a guy who has been lowered down through the roof to be in his presence to be healed. And then a woman touches the hem of his garment. Over and over again, we see some radical types of expressions of how do I love my neighbor? I love my neighbor because it's an expression of the love I have.
So that's from actually this morning's sermon from our church, Plymouth United Congregational Church. And that's our pastor, Reverend Graylin Hagler. He has no idea that we just used his sermon on our show. But he would be pleased because he's very supportive of us. We're very supportive of him. And as I hope you can hear, he is very committed to racial and social justice and applying the scriptures, the revolutionary love and message of Jesus Christ to those things. Why? Because how do you say you love God when you are not fighting for justice on behalf of on behalf of everyone? Because doing justice is an act of love. That was the sermon today, the challenge of love.
And those who have a problem with the God piece, how can you say that you're for social justice and don't go out there and do none of those things?
Right.
So even if you got a problem with God and you got a problem with religion, then how can you say that you want a better world and don't go out and do those things?
Right. I mean, and I think it is very important, especially for people of faith us people of color who are people of faith, to understand our faith, and not just the history of our faith, but how our faith has always fit into the revolutionary struggle of our people, not just in this country but around the world. But let's just stick with this country. See, because Christianity is not a religion of complete passivity. One of my favorite scriptures is in Ecclesiastes, chapter 3, verse 8, where it says a time to love. There is a time to love and a time to hate, a time of war and a time of peace. There's a time for all of these things. Right. And as people of faith, our job is to figure out what our response is supposed to be in each of those times. See, our Bible tells us that these things are going to happen. We are going to experience times of love and times of hatred. Going to happen because that's how humans are. We're going to experience a time of war. It's going to happen because that's what humans do. And we're going to have a time of peace because that's going to happen. That's what humans do. What's our response in each of those times? And I'm sorry if I get a little tongue-tied, but I get excited when I talk about how revolutionary this faith is.
Because it is revolutionary.
It is. And we have allowed outside forces to tell us that it's not.
Well, those outside forces, if you're talking about the enslavers,
right.
There's a reason why the enslaver won't tell you that Christianity is revolutionary. There's a reason why those who want to impoverish us and those who want to murder us and all those things, why they pick pieces out of the Bible and they promote those pieces because they benefit from it.
Right.
You know, you're not going to tell slaves, man, that they have that they're free, that they were born free. You know,
Exactly.
you're not going to tell poor people that economic injustices is something that's against God and that you have a right to your share of the wealth of this planet. You know, they're not going to tell you that. No, they're going to tell you to forgive. Well, while they murder you,
right?
And you're supposed to only forgive. And this is what we as black folks have always gotten. You know, you get beat, you get murdered, you get mistreated. Forgive. I can't stand it. And I said this before. Every time a black man, and why is it always a black man who has served decades in prison for something that he didn't commit? And we all ask ourselves is why it's always a black man, some cases black women, but it's always somebody poor and black. And he does 30 years, 40 years in the penitentiary, and somebody finds out that he didn't do it. And then the first thing these ignorant ass reporters ask him is, are you angry?
Are you angry?
Are you bitter? I want one of them one time to say, you mother effing right, I'm angry. You mother effing right, I'm bitter. Yeah, all of those things. Now, I understand that anger and stuff can consume the soul, and some people could only do that kind of time without those emotions. I understand that. But isn't it kind of insensitive for those folks who see the injustices that has been done to this man, that is the only thing you want to ask him about, whether he's angry or whether he's bitter? So we take that man's example and we apply it to the whole black community. Every time we're asked, are you angry? Are you bitter? Can you find any humor in this and this and that? Hell no. You know what I mean? So, and the fact that we understood as a community that we could not exist solely on those emotions because, those things can destroy you. But I will say this, that the black church is the only institution in the black community that is the strongest institution that the black community has left. So I mean, in order, and we put some things for Jackie, if you go with that.
Yeah.
But there has to be a radical change in our thinking, whether it's with the opioid crisis and whether it's with the way that the black church operates within the black community. The black church right now operate within the black community. It's a hustle.
Yeah.
I'm just going to say it straight out. Most of y'all are about the hustle. I am sick and tired of roaming through D.C., seeing a wife and a husband, pastor and the first lady's face on the side of some broke down ass storefront church, talking about you making change in the community. You ain't making no damn change in the community. The only thing you doing is dividing the pot, sucking it dry. That's all you're doing.
Yep.
You know what I mean? Because you couldn't make it nowhere else, so now you figure, well, I'll start preaching. You don't want to get no real job, so I'll start preaching. I'll put, look, I've been called to preach. Everybody called to preach. You know what I mean? But the thing of it is that you're sucking the lifeblood out of the community. And so Jackie and I, we have, and if it's not you, don't bother me with the, it's not everybody. We know it's not everybody. But I tell you one thing, if you got a church that's already on that block, why the hell you opening up one?
Right.
So we got some plans for this, and you got some verses over there, to kind of back up why the fact that Christianity doesn't go for none of this nonsense that we're having today, and that we're in the prophetic tradition of our faith to do what we're doing.
Yeah, I do. I mean, I shouldn't say I do. The Lord does. And I know there are like 3 people, what is that, 5 people now? I mean, people are like, oh my God, they're talking about Jesus. Oh no, look, y'all, we're not going to get the revolution we want in this country by not working with people who we just don't agree with on some things. We can't exclude people from our little revolution who eat meat if we're vegans or vegetarians. We can't exclude people who are people of faith. Because some of us seriously know that this system needs to change, and we've been fighting to change it for much longer than many of you have. And our faith has directed us to do it. Christianity isn't a religion of complete passivity. Nat Turner used the Bible as justification for his rebellion against the institution of slavery. John Brown did too. Denmark Vesey used his Christian faith as justification for his planned rebellion against slaveholders. As a matter of fact, most black people who participated in, led, or were involved in slave rebellions were people of faith, of the Christian faith.
Yeah, even civil rights. You got Dr. Vernon Johns, who came before Martin Luther
King.
You know, Dr. Martin Luther King. You know, a whole lot of them.
And not just the Christian faith, because I don't want to leave our Muslim brothers and sisters out. I mean, Malcolm X. But it was Malcolm X who told people of faith that, listen, we are being oppressed. Actually, what he said was, we're not getting our asses beat because we're people of faith. We're getting our asses beat because we're black. So when we come together, you need to take whatever your individual faith is, whether it's Christianity or Muslim or whatever it is, and you worship that in your closet. But when we come together to fight this thing, we come together under the banner of black.
But see, the problem of it is we've become a society, man, that we can't even listen to opposing views.
Right.
We can't engage with that. We've so fucking. This is our show. We gotta become fucking pussies, man.
Yeah.
And the reason why I say that, and I'm saying it as a Christian, we become pussies because now all of a sudden now you can't relate to me. If you're a vegan, you can't relate to me unless I'm a vegan. If you're atheist, you can't relate to me because because I'm not an atheist. You know, we have lost we can't even have adult conversations where we can sit down and say, okay, look, all right, you like meat, I eat plants, you go to church, I'm a Buddhist, or I don't have no church at all. But damn it to hell, it ain't right that somebody should work 3 jobs in order to make it in America. Damn it to hell, it ain't right that the government won't address the wrongs that it did with the crack epidemic, flooding communities with crack cocaine, and then saying to hell with those people, move on. It ain't right that we're having all of these wars, these imperialistic wars around the country that's getting our sons and daughters to fight it. It ain't right. We can all sit down and agree to that. You know, and we can all sit down and agree that in the richest country on the planet, why we can't have universal health care? Why is it that our educational system is going into the ground unless you're wealthy? Why is it that we can't come up with a way? China pulls 60 million of its people out of poverty just through the so-called Green Revolution that we've been promised by from Obama. 60 million people been pulled out of poverty in China. Right? Now we're told that, we're supposed to be better off than China because they're communists. We're supposed to, our system, the free market system and everything else is supposed to be, that's the magic, we got the magic genie. But again, 60 million of people been pulled out of poverty. China is kicking our behinds, man, when it comes to investing in their people and investing in their foreign policy. But we act like kids, though.
Yeah.
We sitting around here, man, running because somebody talk about God, running because somebody says something about, black or white or all these other kind of things, because everything ain't got to be tailor-fitted the way that you want it to be. So the only thing I'm saying is, man, like I said before, and I say every time on this show, we ain't got no time. Look, you don't deal with this, then we just don't see you next week. But you know what? But I'm saying this right here, man, is that the revolution got to continue, whether you with it or not. So the thing of it is that if China could pull 60 million people, do you know what 60 million people is in a country of 300 million? They got 1 billion over there. Can you imagine the effects in this country if 60 million of us was pulled out of poverty in a country of 300 million?
God, we really would be the shining beacon on the hill.
Yeah, I mean, I grieve for this country, man. That's why I'm so passionate. I watched that Netflix documentary today, and I seen white people, poor white people, doing the same thing that I seen black people do in my community, trying to save it. Running around here trying to save it. It wasn't about black. It wasn't about white. They seen people suffering, and they was trying to save it. The same thing they doing in my community.
Yep.
So, I mean, come on, man. You with it, you ain't. Unless you just come something, because look, we ain't here to entertain nobody. You want entertainment? There's plenty of other people, social media personalities out there that'll tell you what the F you want to hear. But right here, we ain't doing that.
No.
I cried when I watched that documentary. Because I said, the human condition knows no division. The human condition knows no color. It knows none of that stuff. And I watched those mothers, white mothers, cry over the overdoses of their kids. And they're relative the same way I seen how black mothers and them cried over the problems that crack was causing in our community. That's what I saw. That's what I connected to. And I connected to it because I grieve for this country. And I grieve for the fact that we have not matured enough in order to put down all of this crap that we hold on to and say, look, let's work together and realize that this stuff is wrong. So that's my ad rant for this week.
I mean, what else? It's the horrible thing, the horrific thing that grieves my soul as a person of faith and as a human being is that we didn't have to be there. They didn't have to be a documentary about heroin. They didn't have to be that. That documentary didn't have to be made.
It saddened me, man. It really did.
I mean, because all that had to be done was that people listened to us when it happened to us and looked at us and said, it's wrong that would be done to American citizens. Let's fix that. But instead, we were used as a political football. And we were used as the cautionary moral tale. So that a bunch of people could make a whole bunch of money. So that prisons could be filled. So that a bunch of politicians could get into office on their, like you said, tough on crime stances. And the very people who voted for some of these people are the very people who are suffering right now. That's a shame. That didn't have to happen. But as a person of faith, I can't look at any of these people and say, well, because I've heard some people say this, and this is wrong. It's wrong. Well, your kids should just be locked up like our kids were. We should never want someone else to endure the injustice that we endured. Our struggle should be the foundation and the springboard. If it's not faith, y'all, it ought to be our struggle, knowing the hell that we went through. That ought to make us want to fight to make sure nobody else goes through it. To make sure that our people get the justice we deserve, but also to make sure that nobody else continues to go through what we went through. And see, our faith dictates that feeling in us. Proverbs 31, 8-9 says, open your mouth for the mute. This is what our Bible tells us to do. Open your mouth for the mute, for the rights of all who are destitute. Open your mouth, judge righteously. Defend the rights of the poor and needy. Some of these so-called pastors sitting up in these big fancy churches, and even the little storefront ones, because you're right, hon, it's a hustle.
It's a hustle.
If you run a church, you don't have to pay taxes. So all your little collections, you don't have to pay taxes. It's the hustle. If you wonder why all these little storefront churches came from, all these people haven't been called to preach. Come on. They're preaching from the same Bible as everybody else.
Yep.
They're not preaching a message that's any different. A lot of these folks, I'm sure we're going to get some pushback, but a lot of these folks, it's the hustle.
Well, I mean, and let them push back. I know we're coming out of time. Read that next verse.
Yeah.
And we're going to continue this on Wednesday.
Yeah. The next verse is Isaiah 1 chapter 1, verse 17. Learn to do good. Seek justice. Correct oppression. Bring justice to the fatherless. Plead the widow's cause. There's something I think I need to say about the Bible that a lot of people don't get. And I like to try to explain this.
Okay.
Most of the Bible, 90% of the Bible, is written for Christians. Most of what is in the Bible is directed at people of faith. So those scriptures that I just read to you, those scriptures are not for people who don't believe in the Lord. Those people are for us.
Right.
Those scriptures are our commandments. Those are our marching orders for how we are supposed to deal with people in our communities. Everybody. There's no caveat on that. Who God is telling us we are supposed to fight for justice for, right in there. All who are destitute. Defend the rights of the poor and needy, which means the poor and needy have rights. So we've got religious people sitting in church telling other people of faith, especially black people of faith, that people who have been addicted to crack, people who are addicted to opioids and heroin, who have other issues, who can't find work, who are poor, that they don't have rights. That you know, if they don't work, because they misuse this other scripture in the Bible, you know, if you don't work, then you don't eat. Well, the same Bible also tells those of us who have a little bit more to leave something behind for the stranger and the needy. So if the black church that understood the justice mandate of our faith centuries ago, centuries down, and even during the civil rights movement, if the black church is to be effective at all in the 21st century struggle for black liberation, we have got to abandon this conservative white Republican Jesus, moral majority directed prosperity gospel, abortion focused, gay right opposing focus, premarital sex focus theology. We need to reject that, and we need to reconnect with the revolutionary, African-based, because Christianity is a faith that is rooted in Africa. Bet you didn't know that. See, once you learn that it wasn't white people who created Christianity, then that whole white Jesus myth goes right out the window. And then you can begin to read the scriptures from the revolutionary purpose that they were meant. And you can also parse out the political BS that Europeans did put in there, because it's in there. Well, we're going to be real honest with that. But, I mean, we are a little bit over time, and we don't want to belabor you guys with us. I mean, the black church has to do more than give people hope. This is our great failing, I think, in the 21st century, that all the black church focuses on is giving people hope and telling black people especially to pray, and that everything will be better in the next life, that, you know, that the kingdom of God, that you'll have your mansion in the by and by in the kingdom of God in heaven. But our job is to create the kingdom of God on earth through doing justice for the oppressed. And we believe that there are certain things that the black church needs to do in order to do that. But we're going to talk about those things next week.
Yep.
This week, actually, on Wednesday. So please join us on Wednesday night at 6 p.m. As we continue this discussion on re-engaging the black church in the 21st century black struggle, where we're going to talk about the black church and black economics and black politics. Thank you very much for joining us tonight on Live in Luqman Nation. Connect with us on Twitter, Luqman Nation 1, Periscope, Luqman Nation 1, YouTube, Luqman Nation, and here on Facebook, Luqman Nation. That is Luqman Nation, Luqman Nation.
The most threatening show on the internet. The most threatening. You ain't going to get no more truth than you're getting here.
None. Nowhere else. Share this video. Invite your friends to like our social media outlets. Join us again on Wednesday night. Thank you very much for joining us. Have a good night. Peace, y'all. Be very good to each other.